minutes of the Finance and Rules Committee from the January 18th meeting. Yep. Bill, the second. Ron, okay, any questions, additions? If not, we accept it as written. Now we're ready for presentations and discussions. We got capital reserve and fund balance from Eric.
Thank you very much. I might pull up the chair also. I might let Ryan jump in a little bit, but not too much.
Good.
I think the first slide is mine.
So we wanted to give you kind of a quick summary of our reserves and cash positions. I provide you a report of our cash balances at the during the month of January, so I think as I was putting that together, it made a little sense to follow that up with a summary, and it also ties in very much with our upcoming projects and other projects potentially for the future. So that's what we wanted to share a little bit of today. So Ryan gets this one.
Oh, those buckets.
So just a reminder, this is kind of how Eric and I philosophically look at county finances. When we have these types of conversations about big picture stuff, we're having this conversation today because we're on the verge of some big financial decisions once we understand what the bids are going to be over the next couple of weeks. But just a reminder, we've got the county operations budget. That's our annual $55 million budget. That's, funded by property tax, mortgage tax, sales tax, those types of things that are continually feeding into county operations. It's appropriate that this side of county, finances is conservative, efficient, and sustainable. Very important that it's sustainable. And we need board legislator oversight, obviously, on that aspect. Lewis County is very lucky because we can afford to have a second bucket of county finances. That is our capital and community projects. We currently are holding a debt service of only about $600,000, which is very low. That's for the hospital and the county, very low debt service between the two. Obviously, we're on the verge of doing a little bit more. That's annual, I'm sorry. We have about $6 million of debt, the annual payment of $575. This bucket is funded by pilots, stimulus funds, excess fund balance, and excess sales tax, as we have once again in 2021. We should be able to grow this without affecting property tax rates because this is extra, right? Doesn't need to be sustainable. These are one-time expenses. And this, requires board leadership because Eric and I can put together the budget, but we can't decide to bond money. And we can't decide to do big capital projects. You guys have to decide that. So just a reminder of the philosophy.
So a fund balance review, as of December 31st, and these are preliminary numbers, pre-audit, I guess I would say, as we're into that year-end process. Our general fund, I think we'll be looking at a little over $24 million of fund balance, and again, I mentioned a month ago, cash versus fund balance, they're not exactly equal, but to some extent they're very similar, the numbers should be. Lewis County Health System, and this information came from Jeff Ellinger, a little over $26 million of fund balance. Our county road and machinery, they have two different funds at $1.6 million. Our health insurance fund, which is separate for just the insurance program, is $5.6 million. Workers' compensation, same thing, is a separate fund that is only used for that purpose at $2.9 million. And then solid waste, which is an enterprise fund and operates completely on its own, has $600,000.
Can I make a note on solid waste just real quick? Our original plan, when we were at the precipice of investing in the new system down at solid waste, was to bring our fund balance down to around $200,000. Because we've had such strong receipts, even during construction, we have not had to drop that fund balance down. So that's one of the reasons why we feel really confident that even though the Scale House project is going to come in more than what we had wanted, we can still pay cash for it and our fund balance will remain in a secure position.
Eric, do you remember Lewis County Health System? They started COVID with 40 million, was it?
The next slide has got an update on that, Larry. It doesn't go as far back as COVID. So I'll get to the next slide and then you can follow up that question if you want.
Okay. Is the 24 million unencumbered?
So again, that's the nuances of cash and fund balance, Phil. That number, I'm gonna tell you, is more of the cash balance. So I would tell you, yes, that's unencumbered.
Okay,
If you saw the fund balance, it would probably be a little lower than that.
I understand.
Good question.
Thanks.
You have a couple.
Well, then I've used them up, haven't I?
So Lewis County Health System, and Ryan, again, got this information from Jeff just recently, I believe. So their fund balance on November 1st, restricted 13 million, unrestricted 17 million, so a little over 30 million back in November. Their estimate a couple weeks ago at February 1st was down to 26 million.
And if I could comment,
Yeah. You want to speak to it, you want me to?
well, I was gonna talk about the 13 million restricted. What would you
No,
look at?
well, the 26 is, there's some fairly heavy payments going to be made in the next month. So you're gonna see that go down a little bit more.
Yeah. So in 2018, when Jerry and I were both kind of new here, the county was basically always holding excess reserve fund balance because we were worried about the hospital. The hospital never really held a high fund balance itself. They had a couple of years where they did quite well. They had some grants and some debt forgiveness from the states and the feds. And at that time, their board of managers and this board of legislators passed a resolution, a new policy that said the hospital must hold 10% of annual expenditures in a reserve that can only be tapped into by resolution of both boards. So when we say unrestricted and restricted, that 13 million, it represents their 10% of operations that they have to keep sequestered. The only way they can tap into that is by resolution by their board of managers and the board of legislators. So that's the security blanket that we've established that has now given us some of the freedom to feel like we can get some of our capital projects done without worrying about the hospital, needing to come for mega dollars all at once. To Dick's point, you can see upcoming expenditures. Dick might not be able to see that from your angle there, but we did want to outline, of course, the hospital will have revenue coming in too. So it's not that this is totally net loss, but you have to understand that there are very large expenditures that the hospital is planning on paying. Chief among them is the Medicare advance repayment. During the peak of the pandemic, the federal government gave us a large sum at that time of $7 million of Medicare money in advance. There was a lot of hope and a lot of advocacy that sum would be turned into a grant or a gift from the federal government. Instead, they are going to require repayment. So we've paid back $1.5 million already, but we still have another $5 million to go. So when you look at that unrestricted total, that includes cash that needs to be sent back to the federal government. Again, we've got another large payment coming out with the down payment on the capital project. The hospital has committed $5 million of their fund balance to, towards their capital project. We will know what their bid is in the weeks ahead, and that may change. But, if there is a scenario where the bids come in a little high, and they might actually need to use that $5 million for a down payment. So you can see that the hospital situation, as Jerry alluded to, it is, if you look from November 1st to February 1st, that's quite a change. And, Dick and I and Eric that have been going to the finance and executive committee meetings, this is no surprise. It's the consistent story that the hospital has been telling us, for months now. So that's just an idea of where their finances are headed and something that we're going to address a little bit later today as well.
I think back to Ryan's first comment on the restriction, the 13 million, we're going to look at our fund balance coming up here in a couple slides. And, we kind of have maybe a informal limit to our fund balance or minimum amount we would like to carry. And it might kind of raise the question of, if you combine their restriction and our restriction, is it too much? Might be a thing to think about. Larry, I don't know, back to your question, I don't know that I'd have to look it up to go back to pre-COVID. I think you were saying 40 million, I wouldn't be surprised. It might, maybe not that high.
I never saw it quite that.
I
No,
don't
but
know
it-
if it was COVID, it was when they started the initial conversations about the capital project. They thought they had
So-
40
the pandemic, they've actually hovered in this between 30 and 25 range because there has been federal programs. We've gotten 2 payments of $1.7 million each from the federal government for, healthcare relief. The county has tried to help, send money through the pandemic grants that we've been given. We've tried to process that money through the hospital to give them, the opportunity to get some cash. So the situation could have been worse, but for programs that the federal government, the CARES Act in particular, sent some money their way. And there was another intermediate action the federal government took for healthcare institutions between the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. So, they've gotten some relief, but, when you lose 40 staff, the story Jerry didn't talk about is the impact of losing those staff members and your ability to make revenue, right? So that's, part of what we're fighting here.
Our capital reserves, and so separate out, a couple slides ago, we looked at our fund balances, which are the balances of each of those individual funds. These are separate funds. We have a history of setting aside funds in these capital reserves for future projects. So that's a summary of what these are. On the left is one group of reserves, a general building reserve, and then Phil asked me a little while ago for, we have codes for these in Munis. You might have heard them called, the general building reserve is the HAD. We'll get you a list of those in case you hear or see those referred to in another place. General building reserve is 1.7 million as of the end of December. And just to note on that one will be used for the PSB boiler, which the bids are coming out tomorrow, which, in the $800,000 range. So that's got funds in it that will be designated for that. An equipment reserve, when we have to purchase a vehicle or a lawnmower or whatever, those types of equipment at $600,000. Our environmental cleanup fund, which is for buildings, analysis like at the cheese plant in New Bremen. The Arpa federal funds, which we're keeping completely separate. That was the money received in 2021. We are starting to spend that just very recently, but at 2.5 million. And
That's the first half.
Yeah, don't we
That's
get
the first
another, don't we get up to 5 million?
Yes, good, yeah, good point. It's, I think, about 5.2, 5.1, so that's the first half that's been received. The solid waste capital project still has about 726,000 as of the end of the year. There's been expenditures in the last couple of months, and as Ryan said, the scale house could use whatever's remaining of
That's
that.
the loan from the general fund. That's the holding line item. That will get zeroed out and we'll square away the accounts, whatever the solid waste fund owes the general fund, and they'll start making annual payments.
Yes. So those miscellaneous reserves are at a little over 5.9 million. On the right-hand side, we separated out reserves related to our facilities projects, the upcoming projects. So there's a reserve for the highway building that has 486,000 remaining in it. The DSS building at 210,000. And then we have 1.6 million that we've set aside in the last couple of years for the upcoming projects. So 1.7 million that we can use directly for those.
And we have been paying out of these for all the soft costs.
Correct. So total 7.7 million from those two groups of reserves.
And this is not part of the general fund 24 mil.
Correct. All separate funds. Other questions on those? We can come back to it if we need to. So the building project on the left are some very high level estimates. A couple weeks ago, I think Ryan, we sat down and looked at where we thought those dollars were going to fall. Combine those first 2 or 3 lines, the highway, DSS, and maintenance, we think at about $19 million when we'll see when the bids come out tomorrow. The DMV project, and also we want to include in there, we have the acquisition of land, which I think Joan will tell us, hopefully will close very soon at 430. So the DMV really estimate about 1.5 million that we will need to fund. And then the soft costs for the engineering, the project management at 2.5. So 22.5, maybe a little more with the rest of the DMV project, but we're, again, depending on where the bids come out. On the right-hand side, we wanted to apply those reserves that we just saw on the last page. So with the almost $2.3 million of reserves on hand, that brings us down to just basically the $20 million that we've been talking about bonding for. And as Ryan said, we've already been using the facility of the reserve, the 1.6 million. That was the amount when we started back in about, we kind of wanted to show you totals. I could show you the exact dollar today, but just I thought it would be easier for you to think about. The 1.6 was about last July. We've been drawing on that primarily to pay the engineering firm, because we've already paid them, I don't know, $400,000 to $500,000 out of that $1.6 million. KT Construction, we've started to pay a couple months, so we're using that facility reserve currently to pay the soft costs. So again, we've really been talking about a $20 million bond. Using the reserves that we have available, we think that would make sense to bring in about that amount, again, depending on where the bids come in. So other future projects, I think what we wanted to kind of go back around again, back to those fund balances. And we can talk a little bit more about the project if you want to, but to come back around to where are we going in the future with $24 million of general fund balance. And again, we show, what's a minimum balance. I think this, the board talked about a few years ago, as Ryan mentioned, maybe 10% of our total, including the hospital, 10% of our total annual expenses, about $14 million is a desired reserve. And so we're looking at that as on the county side only. So we theoretically have that minimum general fund reserve of $14 million. That would show you that today we have about $11 million in excess of that. That's obviously a good thing. No complaints.
So where do you get 14 million at 10% on $55 million budget?
Include the hospital, so our 55 million and their 80 to 90 million.
Okay.
So 1.4 for both entities.
So we're doubling up. This is double conservative.
Yeah.
Because the hospital is already holding 10% of their expenses in reserve. Theoretically, if we just wanted to hold 10% of our expenses, it would be $5.5 million. But we're being extra conservative.
And I can think of that's good.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that was discussion a number of years ago, probably before many of these board members were on the board. But it's a good philosophy. If you want to change that philosophy someday, that's something.
Well, we used to always figure 11, 12, but it was because we were including the hospital.
Right.
Yeah. And both of our budgets have gone up since you guys set those fiscal targets in 2015. The number was 11, but since 2015 to 2020, 8 years, 2022, our budget has gone up, and so has the hospitals.
And the healthcare system's I think it's a higher risk business than government. So
Well, it depends on who the county manager.
We're running a pretty risky business.
It's
Right
gotten more risky.
So then Ryan and I just thought, well, let's look at a couple things we talked about, we're thinking about for the future. My 2 cents were, again, you got $11 million available. We should be thinking about what to do with that. To me, it doesn't make sense to just sit on that money. We could sit on our money for a long time, but maybe we should be using it for some good things, and that's what we're thinking about next. So hospital reserves, and that'll be a topic I think Ryan will get to in a little bit. 3.3 million is an amount that you'll talk about. Recreation program, and that's kind of a generic term, but one thing specifically we're thinking about is the Rails to Trails. How much money might we spend on a project like that or other projects? a homeless facility, which is a priority for this year that Ryan has been working with other agencies on. So just an estimate of $500,000. So if you just look at those line items, and there could be others that we're thinking about today, or we, they could come up next week. You've got over almost $6 to $7 million right there of $11 million available. So just, that's, I think, food for thought as much as anything. But I think also just to put out the thought there that we, if there are projects that we are thinking about, we have the available, we have the funds available to do that.
You're gonna send us this.
Certainly can, yep. I think that's our last slide. No, sorry, I've got one more. So I'll let Ryan hit this one too, but this, I think we put this together
This was
6
from
months
the,
or
this
more
was
ago.
from the bucket presentation, but just a reminder that we have a good, we're in a very good financial situation right now with, some excess money to spend on projects. Our future is also very bright. So not only do we have access money that can be used in the community now, we have future money coming in on an annual basis that, we basically already more or less covered the cost of the future bond that we're going to have. So, this is in addition to covering our debt service. We're gonna be able to have this new money coming in as well. So just a reminder that we're in a good position going forward.
Yeah, I mean,
Right, don't some of those change over time?
They do, they get less, yep. This is, I think, what we'll see in 2023.
Yeah.
So a little, obviously over time it gets less, but also over time, who knows what additional, solar and additional,
Oh,
projects
yeah,
could
this
come
is,
on.
this is locked about for 15 years or so,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So Eric, these numbers wouldn't be in the general fund.
Thanks, John. That's exactly what I was gonna mention. In this year's budget, the Maple Ridge, I think it might actually be a little higher than that. That's going to go down in the future. So the $1 million is more the future. The solar project, I think we'll have 17,000 in this year. That is future thinking. There's 2 large projects that, if they move forward, will give us significant revenue. I think they're both expected to move forward. So that the 420 is, a year or 2 down the road at least. So we, like I said, I think only 17,000 in today's budget. The number 3 wind farm is not in this year's budget, but that will come online later this year. The Denmark wind is in this year's budget. The Roaring Brook is not. That, again, I think we'll receive our first payment next year. So most of that money is not in today's budget. So as Ryan says, really looking good for the future.
Yeah.
So basically $1.3 million is in the budget this year of that 2.1.
Well, yes, I think that, again, I think the Maple Ridge is at 1.3 currently. So I think there's one number that's,
Well, I'm just saying what we can take out of the 2.1,
You've got your $600,000
about
debt,
1.3.
you've got your $600,000 debt payment for the courthouse that still hasn't been paid.
Right.
So that's coming out of those funds. And then you have what we did this year, which was just a blind $1 million appropriation into a blank line item because we didn't have a project to associate to it. So we just appropriated $1 million to that capital fund that we've been using to pay the soft costs out of. So that line item will eventually turn into the bond payment. So you'll have $600,000 and then, depending on exactly what we borrow, you're looking at another, $700,000 to $800,000 bond payment.
We can afford whatever.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's the bottom line.
yeah. I think we're, if we're looking at a bond payment of 800,000 to $1 million in that range, and I think it might be towards the lower end of that range. Definitely, we've got, just from these things alone.
The solar, the Denmark, and the Roaring, or the solar, the number 3, and the Roaring would take care of it.
Yes, and the number 3 in the Roaring Brook, I'm not sure how long those pilots are. But yeah, but those pilots are gonna last basically as long as our debt will last.
Right.
Plus, we have the Deer River project, which is still not dead. They're waiting to see if they'll be awarded credits from the state of New York. So that is another potential revenue source.
They should have news on that by the end of the month, I think.
Perfect.
There was a certification requirement they had to meet by, it was like a 6-month thing, but they're at the end of 6 months now.
So back to the, just to full circle here with the buckets. you know, yes, we're in a good financial situation. We've tried to build a firewall. You know, we keep our operations funded by sales tax, property tax, mortgage tax. This stuff is not forever, it's not consistent. It's one-time payments as long as those windmills and solar panels are there. So we built that firewall so that we have capacity to do other special projects, either capital projects for the county or investments in the community. You know, but if you know, that's something we don't need to talk about today, but in the future, we want to leak some of this over into operations and, you know, talk about Anna's traumatic loss team. Maybe we want to, you know, give her the freedom to do more mental health stuff full-time. You know, there's things that we can do operationally as well, but we've tried to keep our operations very sustainable within the traditional tax sources. That's it, I think.
Thank you very much.
You gonna tell us about the 3.3 for the hospital reserve?
We're gonna talk about that as an update to a contract that we currently have with the hospital. So we're gonna talk about that with Joan in executive session.
Tom, can I add just one thing before we move on?
Yep.
I think, you know, being fiscally responsible, having a firewall, I think that's the right thing to do. But I think that we really should have a discussion about when we have too much in our fund balance. And I think a fund balance policy, so that we're very cognizant of when our fund balance is creeping to a level that is past being responsible and into, you know, too much.
I agree with that totally. But a lot will come to light when we get the bids in too, on both of the projects.
Yes.
That'll be a big determinant, I think, on your time.
Oh, yeah.
So
Wanted to see those
then we
numbers.
can do a real good path forward, I should think.
So I'm fiscally conservative as the next guy. Well, maybe not as. But
I'm next to you.
the next guy over there.
Yeah.
But remember, you know, a government organization is not a business, it's not a household. We're gonna be here for 50, 100 years. We're seeing inflation right now. When we save money, inflation eats away at the value of our savings. So what are we getting by keeping it in the bank account? You know, it's better used, invested than sitting. As long as we've got enough for a rainy day, which we need to. But other than that, if we're just having money, we can't invest it, right? We can't go buy mutual funds, we can't play the markets. The only thing we can do with our money is invest it in the community. So,
Community development.
Two comments, if you don't mind. One of them is on investments, and the next one will be a little bit of a soapbox. But I just talked with our advisor from 3+1 this morning, and we're going to try and invest at 0.7%, probably next week for a little bit of excess funds we have. You know, this bond maybe will come in at 2.25%. So the investments today are meaningless to some extent, right? I shouldn't say it that way, but my thought about this, and it ties into a lot of things you just said. You know my past history in economic development, and boy, we scratched and clawed to get any funds to do some things in this county. The economic development team is just transformed, and partly because of the county's assistance, but they're doing amazing things. I think the Arpa programs that Brian has put together, that a number of people put together, are right on target. Their community development, their economic development. You know, think about those things for some of our excess money. We've got $5 million from the federal government. We can supplement that, and those things are right on target. They're great programs that our community develop.
Eric, would it be accurate to say to like the solar and wind projects that preceded the last decade really have given the IDA the flexibility to invest in more community-oriented projects? Or is that money more segregated, like the fees that the IDA collects and things like that?
I haven't looked at their financials in a while, but I think there's certainly just these projects are helping them financially, certainly.
And I don't think Jefferson County, not to disparage any other counties, I don't know of any place, especially our size, that has such a dynamic team involved in economic development, really thinking about not just like the big stuff, but helping out the little stuff as well, and giving everybody kind of a leg up where they need it a little bit.
Yeah, and I think another point there, Ian, that community fund that has been talked about growing from these energy projects, it's been talked about for 2 or 3 years. it's starting to come to reality. The number 3 wind is the first.
Funds go.
Number 3 is the first project that's gonna put money into that later this year, I think at about $200,000 a year. So,
I think so, I don't remember the number.
yeah, so that's a small item, but $200,000 a year, and that will grow with some of these other energy projects. That's a great thing that can be spread around the community.
Plus the IDA was going to take some of their pilot payment and put it in that community fund also. So I should have a pretty good number in it to start off.
To Ian's point, Jefferson County's 5 times bigger than us. I think their IDA staff is like 3.5. Our staff is 2.5. So I do think that the annual fees that we've made from some of these bigger projects have helped us build a more robust team comparatively for our size, you know?
And this is a way to, I think politically, like, things like this aren't probably as common in more conservative states, but in a high-tax state like New York, this is a way to get money back into the community to allow for the private sector to actually flourish. We're kind of clawing back a little bit against maybe state policies that we wouldn't necessarily agree with. That, in my mind, is the justification for it, because historically, government wasn't as involved in these partnerships as it has been in the past, but you kind of have to work within the system, and these extra funds through economic development are the way that businesses are able to do it. At least that's my perspective.
Okay. Anything else on that? If not, we'll move on to Caitlin's got a position vacancy report.
So you're in trouble now, Phil.
So this is kind of mirrored after what our hospital does, but we wanted to talk about vacancies, one, because we have a number of them. As you can see, we have 23 openings listed here. So that's about 8% of our total population right now, which is high for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many did you have at the end of last year?
Well, we had 25 or 28. We've got 5 that are offered right now. They haven't started, but we have 5 people that they've been offered the position, and we're just waiting for start dates to occur.
I'm at the end of 2020.
Oh, I don't know. I can get that information for you.
Gotcha.
I don't know.
Put you on
At the end of
radio.
2020. Yeah. So one of the reasons we're talking about giving you this vacancy report is, one, we, in these committee meetings and in board meetings, we ask for your motions to approve the backfills. I think sometimes we lose sight of those. Look at solid waste, MEOs, nurse, recreation crew leader. Those are back in October, November. That was the last time we talked about those, and they're still open. We cannot seem to fill those positions. We've posted multiple times. So that's one reason, is one, to keep it on everyone's radar that we are still actively recruiting for these positions, and they are open. They're not being paid for. Right now, public health, fiscal manager, that's a big one, high priority. But also the other thing is proposing the idea of whether to continue doing motions at each board and committee meeting for positions that are budgeted, to allow our department heads to be able to post maybe as soon as they know a vacancy is going to occur. Typically takes 2 weeks. It's 15 days for an external posting. If we do a canvas plus an external posting, if there is a civil service list, it's going to take us closer to 30 days to even get somebody to fill a position, plus their 2 weeks notice if they're coming from another job or any of those things. So just moving the timeline up is what we're looking to potentially do here.
Can most of these be provisional?
Most of these are all provisional right now because we do not have a lot of lists. Civil service is catching up from the pandemic, but there was a lot of tests that were delayed, and also there was a lot of people who just have not been taking the tests. Historically, we'd have 20 people take a dispatcher test. I gave the dispatcher test in January with 5 people. So the amount of applicants themselves is just low for our civil service test. So when we go through a list, we're exhausting them much quicker. our lists are not lasting 3 and 4 years like they have in the past. They're lasting 6 months. They're lasting a year. And we can only give tests as often as civil service has them scheduled with the state.
You know, until I read your annual report, I didn't realize we had all that many vacancies. I knew you've alluded to it, but maybe we need to advertise. Maybe it's because people don't know.
We are advertising through our website. We advertise through our staff and workforce development team with our workplace. We've recently started to go on Indeed, which is a different animal. We do work with Watertown Daily Times on certain postings.
And you're on Lincoln Lewis. I
We're on,
see that.
we're on Lincoln Lewis, yeah, so we're,
Didn't,
Put the whole list on.
with this whole list?
Yeah.
Potentially.
didn't the workforce, Lisa, at Snows Department of Workforce Development, they're starting to do some social media
Yep.
ads for us. with
Social
some
media is a big
Fancy
presence for
catchy,
this.
you know, more, yeah, but
So the idea behind this vacancy report, like I talked with the hospital and how they do it, because we have, department heads are like, oh, I need a motion for this and, this. So I asked, what do you guys do up there? And they said, well, we provide our board with a vacancy report, and as long as it's budgeted, it's just on the vacancy report. We don't need approval to fill something that's already budgeted. Where we currently come seek approval for something, even if it's already budgeted. So the question is do we want to continue to do that? Or do we want to move and streamline the process a little further?
I think we should streamline it. I think if it's something that's in the budget and it's not being considered being eliminated, that we pursue filling it. I know people that I know personally that applied at certain places, not the county, but it took 4 months or 4 weeks to get a background check. And they're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. Am I gonna get a job? Am I gonna get called? And it took a month to even get accepted to say, yep, now we're gonna offer you a job. I personally thought that was ridiculous.
I would say in hindsight, not hindsight, but in the past, we did not have the confidence that we have in senior management that we do today. And there were caps put on hirings by the department heads to control employment population. So I'm confident that we have a team in place to control this, to, like Tom says, to streamline the process with positions that are already budgeted and open.
That's a good point. You're right.
I will say our department heads have been so well trained over the last 20 years that they know when a position is open, we all see it. The first thing Caitlin and I do when there's a vacancy is how can we, this, not that losing anyone is ever a good thing, not that we, relish having this many vacancies, but attrition is a tool, especially in a unionized environment, to make restructuring decisions. When you have a vacancy, that's how you restructure and streamline your departments. And we're so well trained in that because, every vacancy has had to come through the board for so many years, and because it's just good, government practice. We're pretty natural at that. For example, the 2 sign, workers that are retiring, that's an opportunity. We don't need to be reminded that that's an opportunity to look at the highway department and see if there's an opportunity to streamline, some things there. So I would say that our department heads have been well trained to kind of look at these vacancies as opportunities to make things a little bit better.
Plus, they come to you and to Caitlin anyway, right,
Yeah.
even before.
They're not just refilling.
Right.
So,
That's all I have.
One of the
Again,
things
this
we
is
might
a
have to look
working.
at is our salaries that we're paying the people, folks, because minimum wage keeps going up, and some of these positions are above minimum wage, I would say. And I don't think we've restructured or taken a look at how competitive we are out there in the workforce. For instance, your heavy equipment operators out here, if you need a CDL, 1st of February that just went through, as much as a $4,000 charge to somebody to get a new CDL. The state of New York changed out a policy to doing that. So if you're looking at spending $4,000 to get a CDL to apply for one of these jobs, you're not gonna apply for minimum wage. Just an example,
Yep,
you know, I just
absolutely.
offered as a thought. And I'm not saying change them all or anything, but I don't remember doing that as a group since we've been on, you know, I've been.
Well, we did
We did a little bit once.
two separate things. For targeted positions in the union, we have done.
Yeah.
So for example, the caseworkers at DSS, we actually did a salary study for the MEO and HEO at Highway, and we found very recently that we weren't that far out of line. In fact, we do quite well comparatively.
Within our county.
Within our county, yes.
Within municipal CDL driving.
Yes, that's, so
You go over the road, you're gonna make a little bit more.
So we also did a full study in 2016 with SciTech. That was the management study. So it's been done for management and it's been done for targeted positions within the union. But I don't know if it's a common, I really don't know if it's a common practice for a unionized environment to, do a soup to nuts salary study. Because at the end of the day, we're negotiating, terms as a whole anyway. So, that could be something to look into. I'm not
I
familiar.
wasn't thinking soup to nuts, I was thinking in some of these more difficult ones to
Yeah.
fill.
Yeah.
Take a little deeper look at why we're having the difficulty.
Absolutely.
So two examples of that recently, Dick, would be the caseworkers, which we gave an upgrade to at DSS, and public health nurses. Actually, before the pandemic, we were having a hard time filling public health nurses, and we increased that. I think we gave them a couple grade bumps. The jail nurse.
Are going crazy.
Yeah, the jail nurse, remember, we had that vacancy for quite a while, and we gave that a bump. So when we encounter positions that are continuously difficult to fill, we have looked at those, but it's a tough, wage environment right now, there's no doubt about it. It's kind of cyclical in government. When the economy's hot and the job market is hot, government jobs don't look as attractive. When the economy turns down, people are grateful to have a consistent, steady, job without layoffs with good benefits. So, that stuff is cyclical. We rode the good side of the cycle for many years. The government jobs were highly regarded for quite some time. In my career, I think this is the first time that the private sector is really, bumping up and competing hard on wages. So, things change.
So I just want to add, this is a first draft, I guess you will, working document. If there's something that you feel like would be beneficial to see, that you'd like me to report on monthly to provide for information, I can certainly do that. But again, this is just the first draft of, these are the openings we have, the date they were open, and kind of some of the other personnel actions that occurred at the bottom.
Could you at least regularly give us this?
Yeah, that's the idea, is I would provide this to you every month with the updates of what's happened over the last month, which would replace the motions every 2 weeks. So that would be the idea.
Maybe it would be useful to see if and when any of them get filled, to see the timeline of how long it takes. I don't know if that's important to the committee, but
Yeah, my suggestion would be, if you're gonna do this on a monthly basis, not only list, if they've been filled, fill nothing.
Yeah.
So we
So
can
then
sort
on
of
the
keep track
following
on
month, then the
continue.
following month, I would take it off after its own month, it says filled, and then a month later, I would take it off. Good deal.
Then we don't have to keep last month's list.
Right.
Compare.
Date vacant, date filled. Yeah.
And then the next month, if it's been filled, then remove it, just leave
Yeah.
it.
I could help you with that spreadsheet.
All right, I like it. Perfect.
Please, check it out.
I will take it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dan. All right, I guess we're ready for document.
Okay, the first one is appropriating funds in the bus operations account in the amount of $20,000 from New York State ATC Grant Award for the purchase and installation of bus stop shelters.
Any questions or comments? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Carried.
Establishing New York State SECR review, lead agency and negative declaration with respect to proposed facilities improvement project at the Lewis County Highway Garage campus.
Questions or comments? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Carried.
Establishing New York State SECR review, lead agency and negative declaration with respect to proposed facilities improvement project at the Department of Social Services campus.
Questions or comments? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Carried.
Authorizing the issuance of up to $20 million aggregate principal amount serial bonds of the County of Lewis, State of New York pursuant to local finance law to finance the costs of the acquisition, construction, and reconstruction of improvements to county buildings.
Questions or comments?
What if we need more? How does-
So the reason that it's 20 million and not 50 is that the board has actually already approved the hospital's $30 million.
Actually, 33 million.
33 million we did for the hospital last year. So your question was, what if the bid, our bid comes in at 27 million and the hospital's bid comes in at 35 million? And we want to do more, we want to buy more. Joan?
We can, we would have to do another resolution to amend, increase the bond. But it's not as tedious a procedure, it's just, we would have to do another resolution to amend it.
Thanks.
Is it easier to amend this to Phil's point and say 25 and go through that process?
We can just make that.
Good point, because if we don't need it, we don't need it. Right?
We would never go, we don't expect to go that high, but we'd have that
And
room.
we wouldn't have to go through the,
Mhm.
We want to look at it.
how about
Go ahead.
22.5, how's that, Tom? So. I couldn't go 25.
Look at how he was sweating, look at how he was sweating.
Jeez, I guess so. I could never have said that.
We got a motion.
Yeah, I'll make that a motion.
A motion to amend the figure to 22,500,000. Do we get a second on that? We have a second?
I will.
Any other discussion on that?
Question.
We approve the amendment first?
Yeah, we already approved the amendment, so now we just need to,
Approve the motion?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor of the motion? $22,500,000. All in favor, say aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Carried.
Aye, aye, aye.
Boy.
I should have said 27.
the next one is authorizing renewal / extension of lease agreement between the County of Lewis and Cornell Cooperative Extension of Lewis County.
Questions or comments? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Carried.
Appropriating funds in the legislative department in the amount of $292,721.37 from fund balance for payment of tax assessment refunds for the years 2013 through 2017 related to the decision and order of the court in the City of Rome tax assessment litigation.
Questions or comments? We don't like it, but whatever.
I think Eric has to amend that, presentation now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true,
Reduce the
yeah.
fund balance.
That's part of the excess, I guess.
All in favor, aye. Opposed? Carried.
Just a note, Tom, this is gonna go before the board on the 24th, because we wanna get that payment process.
Yes.
Right, but next year.
Authorizing the application for Community Development Block Grant COVID-19 response funding for farm worker housing and agreement with Snowbelt Housing Company to act as subrecipient and administrate the awarded program.
Questions or comments? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Carried.
Authorizing inclusion of certain agriculturally viable land into a certified agricultural district and negative declaration determination.
Questions or comments?
Tom, can I ask a question?
Yep.
Why do people want to do this? What's in it for the people that partake?
You get a reduction in your tax assessment.
We get a reduction in time, okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor, aye? Opposed? Carried.
Fixing date of second public hearing for Lewis County Housing Needs Assessment and Market Analysis Program under New York State CDBG, project number 636 CP 77-20.
Questions or comments? All in favor, aye? Opposed? Carried.
Approving correction of tax bill in the amount of $3,265.70 for Time Warner Cable based on franchise agreements with several towns.
Questions or comments? All in favor, aye? Opposed? Carried.
Authorizing change order number 1 to agreement with MJ's Contracting Services for lead asbestos abatement work at 7514 South State Street, Lavelle, under the Downtown Stabilization Project at a cost not to exceed $14,239. And that was the late resolution that was passed out.
Questions or comments? All in favor, aye? Opposed? Carried.
We have a motion to authorize Planning Director Cassandra Buell to send out several RFPs for the NRVC and CDBG broadband project components.
I'll make that a motion. We need a second.
I'll second.
We have a motion, and a second. Any questions or comments? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Motion's carried.
Just a note on that, with this motion, moving this project forward, the CDBG program, which is the Harrisville project and the Fort Lyden project, they have to be completed by the end of the year. So those projects are gonna really start cooking this summer. Same with the Northern Border Regional Commission project, which is the one up in Denmark. We're gonna get that cooking as well. That's not on quite as tight a timeline, but, all three of these investments, hopefully they're gonna see impact in the county by the end of the year. So pretty cool. Yeah, that, I think the one will definitely cover your house.
Any other business? If there isn't, I'll ask for a motion for executive session.
Yes, to discuss renegotiation of an existing contract and also the potential of acquisition of some property.
And you are coming back to make a decision, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Because all day is not enough. I would miss you all.
It's only been 3.
Better than it used to be, it's true, but I'm spoiled.
I remember a general services committee meeting that was 2.5 hours.
Right. Talking about RSOs.
Are you gonna stick around?
Oh, yes. I'll be back in my office.
Okay.
Is that an office in here now?
We're charging you rent, by the way.
No,
One day. a month.
join the parade, and people charging me the thing.
Did we get a motion for that?
Yeah.
I'm the only one that has to leave?
Who made the motion?
You made the motion.
Well, segregated.